The first leaked images of the new Aston Martin have just surfaced, and they don't look like anything we've seen before. At first glance, it's just a car. But look closer and it starts to feel wrong. The side pod profile, the underfloor taper, the lack of visible cooling, and the signature? Adrian Newey. What's being quietly built in Silverstone isn't just a response to the 2026 regulations. It's a warning shot. Because inside these images, behind the render quality and staged lighting, there's something more radical, more dangerous, and more precise than anything the midfield has ever produced. And if what these images suggest is true, then Aston Martin may have just built the most unpredictable threat of the new era. The official launch hasn't happened yet. There's no press conference, no dramatic unveiling with smoke machines or camera flashes. But the internet doesn't wait for invitations. This week, a series of images quietly leaked online. Grainy at first, then sharper, then clearer. And suddenly, the outlines of Aston Martin's 2026 car were no longer theory. They were real. And almost immediately, something felt off. The car doesn't look rushed. It doesn't look unfinished. But it doesn't look like the rest of the field either. The aero surfaces aren't shaped for show. They're drawn calculated for a very specific kind of airflow. The bodywork is tucked so aggressively that even engine cooling outlets seem to vanish into the structure. And at the center of it all is Adrian Newey. His name isn't stamped on the leak. He hasn't spoken to the press. But the signature is unmistakable. Because no one else in Formula One designs cars this compact, this tight, this quietly violent. What these leaked images have done is reveal just enough. Enough to know the AMR26 is not a placeholder. Not a first draft. This car, what little we've seen, is already intentional. And the silence coming from Silverstone? It's not denial. It's control. Because Aston Martin doesn't need to announce what's coming. They're letting the first shadows of this machine do the talking. And if this is just the silhouette, what does the full picture reveal? At first, most observers thought it was just a visual update. A slightly more aggressive side pod. A narrower rear profile. Maybe an evolution of last year's floor. But a handful of engineers, people who live inside the CFD tunnels, who dissect airflow like surgeons, noticed something that didn't belong. A crease along the lower edge of the side pod, too deep to be a cosmetic line. A channel under the bodywork that doesn't appear in any conventional flow map. And more importantly, a complete absence of visible cooling outlets in the midsection. In the 2026 regulations, that's not normal. With reduced fuel flow, higher electrical dependence, and radically compact hybrid systems, most teams are being forced to open up their designs just to avoid thermal overload. But Aston Martin? They've gone the other direction. They've sealed the body tighter than anyone expected. And this is where the questions start. How are they managing battery cooling without visible venting? Why does the rear packaging look 2 iterations ahead of where most rivals are? And how is the air being redistributed without sacrificing stability? According to one technical director from a rival team, the answer may be in how Newey's chassis is working with the ERS, not against it. Because what these images suggest isn't just a clever ducting trick. It's a concept where the entire body behaves like a thermal conductor, distributing heat through controlled surface gradients, letting the car regulate its own temperature dynamically without the drag penalty of visible vents. If that's true, if Aston Martin has figured out how to make the chassis itself part of the cooling solution, then this car isn't just ahead of the curve. It's somewhere else entirely. And what's more disturbing is this. None of this should be visible from a leak. But it is. Which begs the question. What haven't we seen yet? This is where things get uncomfortable. Because what the leaked images don't show, the internal architecture, the cooling philosophy, the real aero philosophy, might be exactly what Aston Martin is hiding, on purpose. And suddenly, a different pattern begins to emerge. This isn't just about shape. It's about timing. The images show a car that looks finished months before most rivals are ready to even bench test their 2026 chassis. The surfaces are sculpted, not placeholder clay. The fit and finish isn't developmental, it's premeditated. Which raises a much bigger question. How far ahead is this team, really? According to insiders, the real twist might lie under the bodywork inside the power unit integration. Because for the first time, Aston Martin isn't just a customer team. They're working hand in hand with Honda. And not just on software and cooling loops, on architecture. That means Newey hasn't just designed a car and asked for an engine to fit. He's designed the engine into the car from the very first sketch. This is rare. This is dangerous. Because most teams, even top ones, build compromises into their first-year designs. Not everything fits. Some airflow is sacrificed. Hybrid components are placed for convenience, not performance. But this looks different. This looks like a chassis built with total information access. As if Aston Martin already knew every limitation, every risk, and every opportunity the rest of the grid would only discover after the first round of testing. And if that's the case, then what we're seeing in these leaks isn't the car. It's a warning. A glimpse at the tip of a structure that's been in motion for far longer than anyone realized. One that may not be chasing the 2026 regulations, but redefining them before the season even begins. By now, you'd expect panic. Or at least a response. A leak this detailed, this early, showing a design this advanced should have triggered questions from rival teams. Should have lit up engineering groups in Brackley, Maranello, and Milton Keynes. And yet, nothing. No technical protests. No interviews picking apart the floor geometry. No comments from team principals, warning about loopholes or pushing for FIA clarification. Just silence. And in Formula One, silence is never passive. Because if a car appears with unconventional shapes, or missing cooling intakes, or strange rear-end packaging, someone always talks. A whistleblower. A consultant. A quote leaked to a friendly journalist. But when the AMR26 images began circulating internally, there was no outrage. There was no confusion. There was hesitation. Because those who understand what they're looking at, they're not confused. They're worried. They know what this might be. They know what NEWEY is capable of. And more importantly, they know what they didn't prioritize. Multiple team sources suggest that key competitors focused their early 2026 designs around battery weight distribution, cooling tolerance margins, and active aero response curves. Good decisions, safe decisions. But NEWEY? He may have skipped all of that. Because if the leaks are even partially accurate, the AMR26 isn't adapting to the rules. It's avoiding their weaknesses entirely. It's not managing instability from hybrid deployment, it's built to prevent it. It's not reacting to cooling demands, it's spreading them passively. It's not struggling with battery packaging, it's integrated at the design seed. And this is why no one is pushing back. Because the paddock knows that once you realize your foundational concept is flawed, there's no fixing it with a side pod update. You're stuck. And right now, they're starting to suspect that Aston Martin isn't. Let's be clear, this car hasn't turned a wheel yet. It hasn't set a lap time. It hasn't faced tire degradation, crosswind instability, or high-deg street circuits. But that might not matter. Because the effect of this leak has already started. And it's not about track performance. It's about strategy collapse. If Aston Martin's concept proves right, if the shapes in those images translate into actual performance, then every other team working off a different interpretation of the 2026 regulations is suddenly vulnerable. Not just technically, but institutionally. Departments that spent 18 months planning energy flow mapping, cooling systems, and aero-neutral hybrid deployment might realize they were solving the wrong problem. Because if NEWEY'S design avoids those challenges, rather than managing them, then every solution built around managing instability becomes wasted effort. Think about it. What happens when Mercedes realizes its 2026 floor design relies on aerodynamic principles that can't be applied without overheating the rear axle? What happens when Ferrari realizes their rear packaging decisions assumed a drag penalty Aston Martin simply doesn't have? What happens when Red Bull, the team that defined the ground effect era, has to play catch-up with the very man who created their dominance? It fractures confidence. In strategy. In simulation data. In internal assumptions that can no longer be trusted. And you can't patch that overnight. Even if other teams recognize the concept tomorrow, they can't copy it. Because they didn't build the car around it. Their chassis is locked. Their cooling systems are committed. Their engine partners have already shaped their deployment profiles. In other words, they're trapped in the past. While Aston Martin, quietly, calmly, may have just designed the future. So here we are. Staring at a few leaked renders, a handful of shadows, and a design language that doesn't quite match anything we've seen from Aston Martin before. But the silence around it? That's louder than any wind tunnel data. Because if this leak was accidental, if these images slipped through by mistake, why is no one denying them? Why are rival engineers privately confirming they've seen the same concepts in internal data exchanges? And why hasn't the FIA said a word? This doesn't feel like a panic. It feels like a pause. Like the rest of the grid just realized something and is trying to figure out how to respond without showing their hand. Because if the AMR26 works, if what we're seeing is even halfway representative of what's coming, then the race isn't for podiums. It's for survival. And what if this leak wasn't a mistake at all? What if it was a warning? A quiet signal from Aston Martin, letting the rest of the grid know. We're not reacting anymore. We're not following. We're leading. And if that's true, if this really is just the beginning of what NEWEY and Aston Martin have prepared, then this leak is the least scary thing about the AMR26. The real fear? Is what we still haven't seen. And what no one, not even the other teams, is ready to face.